How's it going? My name's Nick Reese, and today we're going to be talking about building SEO-friendly websites using Svelte and Elder.js. Elder.js is a new static site generator or server-side rendering framework for Svelte. Before we get into the details of it, I think it's helpful to know a little bit about me and why I built Elder.js. Additionally, Philip on my team also wrote all the tests for it and helped quite a bit. But I was the main driving force for programming Elder.js kind of from scratch, and my goal was to encompass all of the real lessons I've learned across my career. So mainly I've been in the CEO role or the front-end developer role initially, but over the past 14 years, I've mainly done SEO and performance marketing. What that means is performance marketing is generally where you get paid when you generate leads or sales. And initially I did it mainly for the money, but these days I'm mainly focused on basically making tools to help consumers make informed decisions. And what this generally looks like is finding a large government data set, or many of them, merging them together and building a tool that really helps consumers. The latest, most recent version of this is broadbandnow.com and businessinternet.com. What we did is we took several billion rows of government data and made it available to consumers as a zip search for finding the internet providers in their area. We listed about 3,000 providers, and we only had deals with a handful of them, but it was enough to be sustainable. Sold that a little while back, and I've been doing consulting since, and I've migrated some other majorly complex WordPress sites to static site generators. And to be honest, they're a great concept, but the current solutions just aren't built for the type of sites that I build. I know that I only have a limited amount of time, but I have a pretty bad horror story with Gatsby. I led a small team of really great developers, but no matter what we did, Gatsby basically turned into a big ball of mud as you get to a site that has many thousands of pages. So if you have 20,000 pages plus or 50,000 pages, Gatsby becomes a problem if you're querying multiple data sources. Now I'm going to go an overview of Elder.js and a little bit of the features, but at the end of this, we're going to be building a demo from scratch where we basically find a government data set and we build out a 500-page site that's all data-driven, and we'll also implement an autocomplete search functionality using Svelte. All this is in Elder.js. So first, why did we build Elder.js? Beginning of this year, in 2020, I had a friend approach me for building out a site that would help change the elder care space. The site's called Elder.guide.com, and I know that within 5 years it's going to have 100,000 pages, and I just knew that no static site generator was going to be able to handle that. And in my test, the static site generators weren't going to support that. Basically, this ended up with a dream checklist. Having built several sites with static site generators, I knew what I was looking for, but I needed to find it. I didn't want any client-side JS if it wasn't needed. There's no reason to push JavaScript to the client if you're not going to be using it. I wanted to use Svelte for templating. I wanted clean data flow across multiple data sources. I had to tell you that GraphQL is great until it isn't. That was the main problem with Gatsby. I wanted no client-side routing. There was a lot of SEO headaches caused by client-side routing in Gatsby. And I wanted fast build times. Building even a moderate-sized website with Gatsby or any of the other tools can take quite a while. I wanted preview functionality. I didn't want you to have to regenerate the whole site in order to preview it. And I wanted no SEO compromises. In my journey to build this Elder.guide.com, I tested 6 different static site generators and built basically a single template in each of them. And in the end, I decided on Sapper. But I hit some roadblocks surrounding development speed, especially when you have a lot of components. It needs to rebundle them all for both the server and the client, and that slows things down. Also had issues with build times and data flow issues. So I set out in the afternoon and said, you know what, I'm going to commit the whole afternoon to building a static site, an SSR flow, and see if I can generate my own static site from it. And I got it in an afternoon, but little did I know that I would spend the next 6 months kind of exploring that rabbit hole. So today, Elder.js has hit version 1.0. We consider it stable, and in general, here are the high-level features, and I'm going to go into detail on only one of them and get into the demo. But we support partial hydration, and there's 0 JavaScript if the page doesn't need it. No module, and module support is coming. That basically means that it should work in IE, is what we're looking for. Scalable builds. An 18,000 page site runs on a 4-core VM in about 8 minutes. 55% of that in my testing is all in waiting on the database. So could be much quicker depending on what you're building. The same site on a bare metal box builds in a minute and 22 seconds. You get some detailed performance logs that look like this. Pretty sweet. Basically, everything's built around performance. Hooks, I'll talk about that on the next slide. There's 6 official plugins for this. If you're familiar with the Gatsby image plugin, that kind of resizes your images and makes them responsive and serves the best needed for the browser that's visiting your site. We offer that. We also have a full Markdown plugin that you basically drop in your Markdown files in a folder, and out can spit routes for you in Elder.js. Also, there's shortcode support built into the core, and I can do a whole talk on shortcodes, but it's a great way to manage your static content debt that you have. Unfortunately, this talk, I just don't have enough time to do it because I want to get into the demo. So a few notes. First, Elder.js can do static site generation or server-side rendering. It does have a learning curve specifically around explicit routing. I've worked a little bit on trying to streamline that in the docs, but certain newcomers to it do find it a little bit more complex than the standard routing that you see elsewhere. All right, let's look at the why we built hooks. Basically, before Broadband Now, my company managed 30 plus SEO websites, and we had multiple developers. And the biggest lesson I had across that was to have a predictable location for complexity. WordPress is great until it isn't. And what we found is if we used WordPress hooks to manage all of the customizations to the site and then use the same template on every site, we could share a handful of developers across many different sites. And that really allowed us to bootstrap our company and not have to take on funding. And so what this generally looked like is we'd have a single hooks.php file on WordPress, and it would allow you to plug into any part of the WordPress cycle and make the customizations. This allowed one developer to switch from project to project, knowing where all the complexity would be. Also, we had some guidelines for developers to not have specific types of side effects. I wanted this also in Elder.js, and we're going to see this in the demo where I actually hit the roadblock where I'm mutating something that shouldn't be mutated, and Elder.js stops you. Basically, I think about it as bowling with bumpers. When you start bowling, your first time bowling, you might have bowled with bumpers. And the idea is to help you be successful and not shoot yourself in the foot or really not have fun building something. Also, we found that by using this hooks.php in WordPress, that the code was reusable across projects. And that was great. And so that was a big goal for Elder.js, is to have reusability and also have plugins. So basically what Elder.js hooks allow you to do is tap into any part of the build process while keeping your site maintainable. And you know that all of your complexity should live in your hooks.js, because no project starts out as a ball of mud, but it happens over time. You kind of think, okay, I'm just going to do this little hacky fix here, and then you forget about it. And you come back later, or someone else looks at your code and they don't understand what's happening. If you have a single place for all of that complexity, it really helps streamline things. So let's look at hooks, and then we'll get into the demo. Essentially, hooks, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a list of hooks, and basically data flows through your application as a page is generated. Basically, there's several hooks that run at server start, and then every time a page is requested in a server-side rendering context, all these hooks fire in this order. And on the left, you'll see the Bootstrap definition. This is from the docs, and essentially each function that's registered on a hook is given a list of properties that they have access to, and then a list of which of those properties are mutable. And then there's also some documentation on what that hook is good for. And what this allows you to do is know that, okay, I'm going to get this data object. I can mutate this data object. Great. And you know that on all the other hooks, certain things are mutable and others aren't. And that allows you to basically have limits on who's doing what. So you don't have someone stopping the entire build or changing a core build variable like right before compiling the HTML and causing everything else to have issues. So we're going to be building a demo from scratch. I like using government data. If you want to try to find your own data set, go to data.gov. And I really spent a lot of time trying to find the right demo for this. I worked with 4 different data sets, and all of them, I ended up spending a lot of time writing code to massage the data to make it usable. Finally, I stumbled across a data set that required minimal massaging, but it's in GeoJSON, so we have to do a little bit of it in the video. what we're going to be building is a S&P 500 company finder with an autocomplete. And I'm about to show you what that's going to look like. Here's what the data looks like. And if you want to download the data, you can in the video, because I pre-recorded it before this intro. I didn't want to open the full data set. So just take a mental model of this. We basically have a properties object that has all the details, and that's what we're getting at in the demo. So without further ado, we'll jump into the demo and we'll let you see what we're building along with us building it. Thanks. What we're going to be building is we're taking a JSON file of the S&P 500 companies that we found on data.gov. We're building a search functionality that is hydrated on the client, and then static routes for all of the individual companies, which have all the data. What's happening under the covers here is Elder.js is generating all this static HTML, hydrating the client with the data that is needed, and then setting up an intersection observer and doing a few other things to hydrate this in a smart, intelligent way. So I've got a freshly cloned Elder.js minimal template here, and we're going to build what you've just seen. I'm going to run npm start, which will go through and roll up all of our Svelte components and templates. And additionally, it'll kick off a server. During development mode, I recommend you basically run npm start, and then in another window run npm run dev rollup. And what this will do is this will live reload or re-roll up your components every time you change them. It's going to keep reloading for a second. All right, we're good. So now we have the minimal template, which has a clock that hydrates it and gives you a minimal simple route. So that's where we're at now. We're going to start with the home page. All of your code lives in your source folder. You have a components folder where the clock lives. You have a layout and some routes. We're going to start with the home. So the home route, what we're going to start doing is we need to add in node fetch. So let's do an npm install save node fetch. We're going to go ahead and import that while that's running. Now here, the big thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking this URL that we found from data.gov, and we're going to be returning an object called companies here. And what this will do is this will pass into our home.svelte, and at data.companies, we will have access to it. So let's go ahead and do that. We've got this URL. We now need the fetch code. We go ahead and copy this over for sake of time. So we have our fetch code here, and we're going to be returning companies here. So what's happening is we're running a fetch, and this is an async function. We're running a fetch. We're now getting the result. We're getting because this is GeoJSON, we need to do a little bit of ETL in order to be able to use it, and we're going to pass in our companies. So let's go into home.svelte, console log this, data.companies, and we will see in here that all of the data gets put out. Now what's happening in the background is there's an Elder.js plugin that is running a reload every time we reload our server. So every time I save, you'll see it spit it back out, and it'll reload the page for us. So that's the reason why we could see it immediately. So now that we've got the data in our home.svelte, let's go ahead and make it a little bit more interesting. Let's go ahead and output all the details for each company. We'll go ahead and remove this simple route. We'll open up a UL. We've got an each statement. Companies and then company. And because each of these Svelte files that are within the routes are actually a special type of, in Elder.js, we call them Svelte templates. They're a little bit different than a Svelte component. They're designed only to be a server-side rendered. So they get 4 different props here. That's the reason they're there, even though we're not going to use them. And there's no real downside to leaving them there, so you can remember what the options are. But let's go ahead and finish our each statement. We're going to go ahead and have an li in here. And we know we want to output the company and then name. Since this file, everything's capitalized, it's going to be capitalized here. Let's go ahead and reload this and see what we've got. that moment when it doesn't work, right? Oh, it's data.companies. All right, so now we've got all of our companies. Now we need to set up a link to each of these. And what we've decided for this demo is we're going to link on what's known as the FID. So essentially what our routes are going to look like is 1, 2, etc. So it was just a unique data point within the data, and each URL needs to be unique. You may want to do something different. We haven't quite set this up yet, so we will come back to linking all this up. Let's go ahead and remove this clock component, and let's work on building our autocomplete functionality. We do hydration something like this: component name, and then hydrate client, and here's where we pass in our props, right? So what's happening under the covers, we're actually generating the mount code for Svelte. And so this will create a new root Svelte component. Since we want to use an autocomplete component that needs to connect to, needs some of the Svelte directives such as bind, in order to bind to variables, we can't do that within a root component, so we need to wrap it. So we're going to create a new component here, and we're going to call this company finder .svelte. We'll go ahead and get this open. We're going to need a dependency npm install. Let's go ahead and save this. And what is the name of it? It's simple svelte autocomplete. If you made this package, thank you so much. It was great for this demo. So go ahead and start with our script tag. We've got we're going to import simple svelte autocomplete. Okay, so we've now got this, and it's going to receive a prop called companies, and we're going to use selected in order to know if we have something selected. And here we're simply going to add in our autocomplete. And so what's going to happen is we're going to bind to the selected item, and we're going to render all the companies looking at the name field. So now that we have this ready, we need to import in the company finder. Let's go ahead and import that in and hit save. Don't know why Prettier's not cleaning things up for me. Let's do company finder. It's complaining because it couldn't find the module for that. And so once again, it's not finding a module. Company finder. Sometimes this happens. You need to restart your rollup. And in a moment, it should be done. At least this is realistic. Sometimes you end up not. Sometimes things don't work as you'd expect. So here you go, auto complete. So you got your autocomplete here. Now this code should work. Now let's go back here. Let's see if our autocomplete is indeed working. There's no results. So it may not be getting the correct data. So let's see what is being written to the client. Nothing. That's the reason it's not working. So before we dive into getting this wired up, let's actually look at what's being mounted right now so you can get a conceptual understanding of what's happening. All of this code here is used for the live reload during development. What's happening here is each component that we're mounting is given a unique ID. We pass in the props here, and we're hydrating it. So many of the things that you can do with Svelte, such as Svelte directives, can't be used here, as I discussed, because this actual mount code doesn't support it. So what we want to do is we want to pass in just the data we need. This large JSON file that we're working with actually has a lot of data on it. I'm not actually going to open it because it's going to force me to download it, but it has a lot of data there, which we'll see in a moment. We only want to pass in the data that is actually needed. So we're going to actually map over these companies and only pass in their FID and the name so that we can basically build this. So I'm going to copy this code over for the sake of time, because I'm error prone when it comes to writing things. So we've got data.companies and companies. For some reason, Prettier is not formatting for me, which is a bummer. So now we have our autocomplete. And what we'll be doing is when you click on this, we'll redirect you to their individual page. But in order to do that, we need to wire up all of these into real routes. So before we move on, let's go ahead and set up the really simple redirect logic. And so I'll just copy and paste this over. And what this will do is when we select it, it'll redirect us to the FID. I know that there's other ways to do this, but very quickly for this demo, this was a quicker way that it could work since I couldn't get the autocomplete events to work immediately. So we can see now it's redirecting us to here. So let's go ahead and build these individual routes. All right, let's change this simple route to company. Within company, we're going to need to change simple.svelte to company. And here's our route. So very simply what's happening is this is the first real route file that you're going to be seeing. The last route file used both defaults. And essentially this is the default for the permalink function. We can go ahead and take this out because we're going to be using that. But this is what a more complex route file looks like. And there's a full tutorial on how to use route files coming. So I'm not going to spend the time during this talk covering it. But we're going to go ahead and set up routes for all of them, and we're going to return in specific data here. So let's go ahead and set this up. Once again, we're going to need node fetch, and we're going to go ahead and import in the company data on all these functions besides permalink are async. I don't know why it's left off on the minimal template. I will resolve that after this tutorial. So there we go. We've got the same code that we had in our home route to go ahead and import the companies. And all we're going to do now is pass in each of our what's called request objects. And what these request objects represent is anytime in like a router like Express, let's say you have something that's blog slash slug, right? Whatever the slug was would be passed in. In this case, our URL is going to look something like this. So we need to define all of our slugs. And Elder.js, in order to build quickly, uses something known as explicit routing. And what we have to do first is define all of our request objects, and then we take those request objects and turn them into a permalink. So this should give us all of our routes. Let's go ahead and reload and see if we get all of our routes. And let's go to 1 and see if the page at least loads. Here, 1. It may not have any data in it, and we're seeing a module not found because company.js is not found, and it's because anytime you add a new Svelte component, a new file, Rollup is not watching it, and you're going to need to add it again. All right, now that it's all compiled, we should be good. Let's check and make sure. See if 1 works. It does. So we've got a simple route here. Before we move on to setting up the actual data in the route, the company view, we can see that what's happened is for all 500 S&P 500 companies, we now have a route here. So we need to file in or funnel in what data we're going to need within that Svelte component. So here we're going to once again copy in this code, and if this feels redundant, I'll show you in a little bit how we will simplify it. And from here, we're going to take and just do a quick find and return the company. So here's the code for finding. So we're running the find function on the array. We're matching the FID to the request ID, and this gets a request. And we're going to return this company. So there we go. Let's move to our company Svelte. And let's see what's logged out on here. Console log data.company. We should see in here data.company put out. So these are all the fields of what our company object looks like. Let's go ahead and make a really, really simple page here. I like to have the ability to navigate to the home page, and I'm going to copy this over and I'll walk you through what this does. First, this is the ability to navigate back to the home page. This is the name of the company is what we're going to do here. So this is going to be data.name, and data.details. And this will loop through all of the entries and show us what we have for each company here. So we go back to this. We've now got something that's not working. So let's see where I made a mistake. Cannot convert undefined to an. Okay, so we got data.company.details. Actually, it's just going to be data.company. And so here we go here. Undefined, the name is undefined, so we need data.company. And now all of our code is being piped in, and we can now set up the routing for all these. But these should work. So you can go to Steel Dynamics and it will now output it to the page. But the really fun thing that's going on is the actual hydration of this. That's the really useful thing. But before we talk any more about that and see the code that it's actually putting into the page, let's wire up these and see one of the helper functions. So let's go back to our homepage, and what we're going to be doing is using a helper function in order to link these. So if our permalink function within company changes, if this changes, let's say you wanted to make it the name, all of the links would change. This is a pretty common offering, and Elder.js also offers this. Let me go ahead and show you how this works. So we've got a space href, and we'll wrap this, and then we're going to use helpers.permalinks.company, and we're going to pass in the slug of it just like we did in the all function where we were defining our request objects. And there we go. So now the page, all these links should work. And we've built a very minimal site with client-side hydration. Let's go ahead and look at the code that was generated. What's happening here is we've written all the props that were passed in and defined in this hydrate client to the DOM, or to the HTML, and it's mounted here. We have some module, no module code that's running, and it will go ahead and mount it all for you. So at a high level, that's how all of this works, and that's what's going on. Let's very quickly talk about hooks. And you may have noticed in our code, we duplicated quite a few different things. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our two route files side by side, and you'll see that this code is exactly the same across both of them. I'm working on a much bigger monitor. I'm not going to make my screen any bigger because you won't be able to see it. But essentially, this code is duplicated on all of them. So let's go ahead and open up our hooks file. You'll see that there's a single hook in here. And we're going to define a hook so that we don't have to keep defining this data. Instead, it will get passed into us here and here. So this will come in on the home page, and we'll also be able to get it within the company page. Basically, what's happening is Elder.js runs hooks in a sequential order, and so you know that the data function will be run at a specific time, and the all function will be run at a specific time. And those happen after the Bootstrap hook is run. So we're going to define a hook on Bootstrap that defines what company data is, or maybe we'll actually just say companies so we don't have to keep transforming the object. So let's go ahead and grab this code and let's write that hook from scratch. Let's say hook, we're going to use the Bootstrap hook. Name is add companies to data. Description. We require all of this to be defined in order for us to better document what's going on. And I know this is boring watching me type, but adds companies to the data object available in all hooks and routes. So we've now got an async function where we can do whatever we would like, and we're going to get a data object that is empty here, and we can define whatever we want on that. So let's go ahead and set up a fetch. We're going to need node fetch. So let's go ahead and import it. And we've imported it. So now this code will run exactly the same. We return our data object, and we're going to spread it out and then add in companies. What's happening here is Elder.js will run all these hooks in a specific order. And each hook, if you look at the hook interface in the documentation, it has things that can be mutated and things that can't. So it defines what props it will get, and along with which props can be mutated. And so this adds a way to predictably know what will be mutated on each hook. And I really like to have all of the cruft, so to speak, the hacky stuff that happens on a project in one file. And that's generally where your hooks.js file comes in, is all the crufty stuff happens there. So now we can go to the company routes, and we'll see that if we do data.companies here, we can just remove this code, because this all function is run immediately after the bootstrap hook, which this is run on. So additionally, data is run during the page generation cycle, and that's run about halfway through the page generation cycle. After the majority of the hooks have been run, it is run. So we'll have access to this same data object here. So now we have data.companies, and we can remove this code. We can do the same thing on the home route. So we'll go ahead and get rid of this companies and just pass in companies. We won't even need to pass this. We can actually remove this entire function. We can just return it empty, nothing. You can remove the whole thing as well, if you'd like. So everything should be working. Let's go ahead and see. We refresh the page, and we've got an error, of course. So things are undefined somewhere, and data, routes, companies is not mutable on this hook. So what I did here is, instead of returning data, I was spreading it across, and we're trying to mutate it. And what we're seeing here is actually that the hooks is denying us to mutate companies. Well, there's not actually a prop called companies, but it's not in the list of things that are mutable. So it's preventing us from polluting the global scope or having plugins do things that are unpredictable. So instead, what we actually need to do is we need to do data, and we need to return a data object here in order to populate it. So there we go. The site should work as intended, and we now have a fully functional Elder.js site, but we are missing one last step. Let's go ahead and run npm run build, and you'll get to see it build. We're going to rebundle everything. It's bundling it, Babel filing it, tersoring it, runs through all of them. And then it builds 501 pages in 1.72 seconds. I think that's a pretty fast time, and we're back to the presentation. All right, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that demo. Quick note, that demo, because I recorded it a couple times, I accidentally used the npm beta version that was local on my own computer, so that was the reason there's extra console logs and some funky errors. Also, what I was testing there is no module support, and so it's coming. It's just not quite ready, and it was in the actual code there, so you got to see it. A little bit on closing. First, Elder.js is great for data-driven sites and blogs. If you have a whole bunch of markdown on your current blog, basically if you clone the template, you can toss the markdown in a folder and it'll generate a blog for you. Apps are possible. We do server-side rendering, but unless you need more control and power, and you're really familiar with Express or Polka, use Sapper. There's a lot more tutorials out there, and for instance, if you wanted to implement authentication, there's tutorials on that where otherwise you'd kind of have to figure out how Elder.js does it, which hook to tap into. It would be the middleware hook, and how to kind of set it up. Unless you're a power user, I would suggest using Sapper for true apps where like people are logging in. One thing I want to touch on is the reason we open source this is it's an SEO experiment. all of the docs are hosted on elderguide.com, and the goal is that if people write about Elder.js, they link to Elderguide. So far, it doesn't seem that those links are serving us, but it's still early. It's an SEO experiment. Also, we're interested in hiring. We think that because I'm an investor and I also work with other investors and we invest in SEO properties, I believe that by open sourcing our framework, not only is it great documentation for our team, but it also should make hiring easier. So if you're a great backend Node.js person that also has Svelte experience and you want to work with Elder.js, feel free to drop me a note because we're hiring. Last call to action is to try the template out. You can simply do a dget and go ahead and run the template. You'll see what it's like. You can explore it, and I hope you find Elder.js useful for your needs. And with that, that's it. Thank you so much for your time, and best of luck.